Hey there. In this installment of the Offset Podcast, we're going to talk about all the things they don't tell you about becoming a professional colorist. Stay tuned.
This podcast is sponsored by Flanders Scientific, leaders in color-accurate display solutions for professional video. Whether you're a colorist, an editor, a DIT, or a broadcast engineer, Flanders Scientific has a professional display solution to meet your needs. Learn more at flandersscientific.com.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Offset Podcast. I am Robbie Carmen.
And I'm Joey Deanna.
Joey, today we're going to talk about mansions, Ferraris, and wads of cash, because obviously that is why we got into the color correction business, because all of the glory, the spoils, the riches are ours to be had as professional colorists. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, that's
why
that's
why I meant it. No, in all seriousness though, we wanted to do an episode about kind of I don't know, I hesitate to call it the dark side of color correction or the dark side of post-production.
potential
I think-
pitfalls.
yeah, the pitfalls. I mean, I think that, over the years, the stressors, the both physical and mental exertion of people in production is really widely known. I mean, there's people work incredible hard, physically and mentally hard, super long hours. I think a lot has been documented about editors and the BS that a lot of editors have to put up with. And clearly, the VFX market has been talked about a lot in this regard, because it's hard to find consistent work and companies going out of business, all kind of stuff. And during that whole time, I think our end of post-production, our little fiefdom of color correction and sitting in dark rooms, has kind of been seen as this, man, this is the pros. This is the A list. These people sit in these rooms. They make a lot of money. Everything is just roses all the time. And for those of you who are just getting started in color correction, there might have been a time it was like that. It might have been a time where everybody was getting paid $1 million and driving Ferraris around. But there are some dark sides or some lesser good sides of that. And so we want to kind of cover that stuff a little bit today, of course, and tell you about the things that really nobody ever tells you about being a colorist. And of course, if you guys have some things to add to the list or some things that come to mind as you listen to this, feel free to leave comments if you're watching this on YouTube. You can also comment if you follow us on Instagram or Facebook. Of course, you can always head over to theoffsetpodcast.com and you can leave some comments there, as well as, by the way, submit some ideas from some new episodes. We're going to try to focus in 2025 on getting some more user-submitted episode ideas in the queue as well. So you can head over there. So, Joey, I think I want to start this episode by something that has kind of popped into my world over the past year or two about being a colorist, and it's something I've had to work on really hard, and that is the idea that being a colorist is not great for your physical health, especially, right? But also some mental health stuff too. Just as a reminder, Joey and I did an episode on mental health that was well received. I think probably the middle or spring of last year, sometime around then. If you haven't checked out that episode, please go check it out. It had a lot of good stuff in there. But one of the things that nobody tells you about being a colorist is that, hey, it's going to mean oftentimes 14, 15, 16-hour days sitting in a chair, sitting down the entire time in a dark room, not getting sunlight, avoiding your family, and all that kind of stuff. And literally, I think every colorist that I know, one of the things that we always talk about is like, hey man, you started a new workout routine? Oh, you started a new diet? Because it's easy to kind of let yourself go as a colorist, because we spend so much time just seated and pushing buttons. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and unlike a lot of jobs, even in the industry, with what we do, unless you have an army of assistants, and even if you do have an army of assistants, you're still going to be supervising their work as well. At the end of the day, we're confronted with a show that has maybe 1,500 shots in it. We're going to need to go through every shot in detail, It all needs to get done. There's no like, I'm gonna sail through everything. Some are harder, some are easier, but at the end of the day, we've got to get through every shot of every show, and there's just no replacement for the time in doing so. There's no easy shortcut. There's no way around it. You need to actually get the work done. And I'm not saying that other disciplines and other things don't have that same
Yeah,
issue, but
yeah.
like if we were building widgets, we could bring 10 more people on to do different steps of the widget building process. That's harder for grading an hour-long documentary.
Yeah, and I think unlike editorial where it's a lot of segmental build up to the final product, we often don't get that opportunity to be like, okay, here's just the first 5 minutes or the next, the next, it's like, no, we want to look at the whole thing in its entirety done. And so we don't have the ability to kind of iterate like, oh, okay, well, I thought we were working on making changes based on the first 5 minutes comments. Like, no, we got to get it all done before anybody even looks at it, which just necessitates a boatload of time spent doing that. And we did an episode on kind of avoiding burnout. So there's some specific tips kind of in that episode that kind of are germane to this. But I think that's one thing that I think the young colorist might look at this, go, oh, this is so much fun. I'm making image improvements. And that's true. You are making image improvements and making things better, but the time suck can be really big there too.
It can be real fun for the first 100 shots, and then there's 900 more. And
Yeah.
you can't have only the first 100 shots look good and be consistent.
Yeah. And I think another one that I would add to the pile here before moving on to some other things, because I think related to health is just some family stuff or whatever that I'll riff on in a second. But it just reminded me of another thing that I think is really unknown to a lot of aspiring colorists, and that is, it's really easy to go on Instagram and other social media platforms and look at professional colorists' work and go, holy crap, everything they touch is golden. Everything is beautiful. It's perfectly polished. I mean, and it's easy to create this like level of like envy and like, keeping up with the Joneses feelings, right? What nobody ever told me before becoming a colorist is that 10% of your work is that stuff that you want to show off to people and be really proud of it. 90% of it is stuff that varying degrees of I wish nobody knew I was associated with this project kind of thing, Not, and I jest. It's not that bad, but I'm just saying like not everything is gold. And there's one of those things where I think it's really easy when you get into the world of color just to think that everything is going to be about creating beautiful images. And sometimes it is. But oftentimes, more times than not, the job is about getting something that's acceptable rather
Yep.
than beautiful. And that can be a little bit if you're the type of artist that is really, keen on just making everything the best it can, sometimes it's out of your control. And I wish somebody had sort of early on in my career told me sort of like that like I think that I could have put a lot of my frustration, my OCD aside because in my later years I've learned that not everything is art, but especially getting into color correction, I wish that somebody had said, "Hey, not everything is art. Sometimes you got to just make it acceptable and move on."
It's even better than good. It's approved.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And so, that's one thing I think that a lot of people like this, like everything's going to be perfect. And that doesn't exist all the time. So I
Yeah,
said,
and chasing that is a losing proposition, right? You need to be chasing happy clients and return business and doing the best work you can, but getting yourself into a feedback loop of this is never good enough is never going to help.
yeah, I agree. I 100% agree with that. So the other one that I think, and I talked to a lot of people about this, but I don't know. Everybody's situation is going to be slightly different, but like combined with the time that you're spending bad for your own physical and potentially mental health, one of the things that I've been really impacted over the years is just those long stretches away from family, friends, special events, things of that nature, because the anxiety has built up so much that I feel like if I was to walk away to go do these things that I probably should be doing, the angst builds up, the anxiety builds up, the worry builds up, and it makes everything for me just worse. And I can't tell you, now my kids are basically teenagers, and so we have like a different dynamic. But like I look back on it when my kids were, 2, 3, 4, 5, and my wife tells stories about like, oh, we were at this thing or at that thing, and I'm like, what are you talking about? And inevitably, it's like, oh, you might not have been there. You might have been at the office working, right? And that's part of the job to a certain degree, but that's also something that, 25 years ago, jumping into this, I think I would have taken a slightly different tack on how I manage my life and my business, because the reality of it is I have spent a tremendous amount of time away from my family and friends. I've not gone on trips. I've not gone to, various things, games, etc. And like it's easy to make excuses for those things, but now looking back on it, it's like, man, was that crappy cable television show really worth, missing, X, Y, or Z? And I'm mixed on that, and it's one of those things that I think going into it, and I try to now, but I would have done better at the time. It's easy to say, hindsight's 2020, but like it's something to be aware of. Managing the family expectations, friend expectations can be difficult.
Yeah, and a big part of that is kind of how you approach your career as a colorist, right? If you're independent, uh, kind of working for yourselves like we are,
Yep.
there's a lot more of that problem because you are not necessarily scheduled by a facility with, set hours and set things like holidays and vacations and stuff like that. If that's the kind of thing that will really, really bother you, maybe working for a facility and not as an independent colorist is the approach to take. But we've talked about this a lot. It's the aspect of working for a facility in the current ecosystem
Yeah.
has changed drastically since I think either you or I have worked in a
Oh, I
facility.
mean, let's put it this way. I mean, like, I wish somebody had 25 years ago told me that, because here's why I started my own company 25 years ago, because I was a hot shot who thought he knew it all, and I didn't want to be the low person on the totem pole. So I was like, well, screw it, I'm gonna go do my own thing. In hindsight, that journey has been hard. I mean, that, there's, where it's like, I talk to people who have, I'm using air quotes here, regular jobs, right? And they're like, whoa, payroll on the 1st and 15th of the month, and, benefits. And I'm like, well, it's been 7 weeks since I last paid myself, and I get my benefits through my wife, and, all that, whatever. Like, running your own thing brings on its own level of anxiety or whatever. But to your point, I think the flip side of that has always been, well, I can always go get a job at a facility or a network or whatever, but it's harder than ever to have that off ramp to get to, for people who are currently independent. But it's even harder to get that from scratch. Like you're new out of college, want to go work for a big post facility. Good luck. The days of the huge post facility hiring assistants out the wazoo is really really faded. So it's, I think if you're, interested in color correction in this game, just be aware it's harder than ever, probably at any point in my career, to go work for somebody else in a capacity of like a salaried position.
Yeah, and we've talked about that in the past a little bit too, where the result of that is that kind of the normal to us process of coming up in the business and mentorship and learning has, I feel really gone downhill in
Yeah,
our industry
totally.
over the past maybe 10 years. And I don't know the answer to how to fix that. And that's just kind of something to not to be too like, I don't want this whole episode to be doom and gloom,
Yeah,
so
I
take
know,
it
I
all
know.
with a little bit of a grain of salt, but that is a real crucial thing to the younger creatives coming up in this business who want to be full-time colorists is where do you go to learn?
Yeah.
You can't just jump out of college or even, a different career path maybe and I'm going to start my own color shop, right? The hardware is easy to get nowadays, the software is easy to get nowadays, but if you don't know the business and you don't have connections, you don't have a previous work experience, that's never going to work. So
Well,
where do you get that? Working
yeah.
for a facility. And like you said, that's really hard these days.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you. We don't want to make this all doom and gloom, but I'll add one more doom and gloom thing and then put a positive spin on it. Is that, you know, I think for a lot of people, they're going to find going to work for a facility or a network or whatever to be challenging and difficult to do. And running your own business is hard. I mean, there's no way about that. A lot of us creative types aren't prepared for the stuff that goes on with running your own business. Like in the past year, like I had to go through like it was easy. It was kind of BS to be honest with you, but like I had to go through an audit, right? First time in 25 years I had to go to audit. And you know, Joey, I was like I mean, like a ball of anxiety compressed into a black hole. I was so anxious about this, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like stuff like that, or like reporting, payroll stuff or whatever. Like, there's this whole other aspect, not to mention sales, marketing, benefits, eventually dealing with employees or contractors, all that kind of stuff. It's a whole lot of extra energy. But I will put a positive spin on that, right? So it's harder than ever to get a full-time job as a colorist or in post-production. It's not that hard to start your own company, but doing so has problems. But I will say I wouldn't trade it for the world, and three reasons. Number one, success or failure is on my shoulders, and I prefer it that way. I definitely like that feeling of my efforts and what I do have tangible results to how much money's in my pocket, the success, etc. Right? I'm sure you feel the same way too. The other part about this is that flexibility of doing your own thing. I wish somebody 25 years ago had explained this to me in a way that didn't make it sound like the first part of what I said, didn't make it seem like it was hard, but made it seem like this is a good thing. Because guess what? If I want to take 3 or 4 days off, most of the time, if I want to take 3 or 4 days off and not do anything and play video games and whatever, totally, I can totally do that. Or take a vacation, or even on more in the more mundane. It allows me to do things like, oh well, my wife's at work, but the kids need to be picked up at 3 o'clock. Well, guess what?
Hmm.
I'm around at 3 o'clock. I can go pick them up, and so it does offer a little bit of a quality of life thing if you can manage it in a way that gives you a lot of flexibility that you might not have working for a company or a facility or a network or whatever. Because it's a lot harder to go to your boss and go, hey, I know it's 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, but I need to take off the rest of the day because my daughter's home sick or something like that. That's much more difficult to do.
Yeah, and on the flip side of that, to add, I guess, some optimism to this, right? Like we said, it is harder to get a job in a traditional post facility, but the other side of that coin is that more, and I hate the word, but I'm going to say it, more content is being made than ever before. And there's a race for that stuff to get better and better and better. And
Yep.
companies, nonprofits, groups, organizations, stuff that you would not normally associate with media production are getting more and more into media production and doing it more and more themselves. So the answer for, I think, some of the more junior artists coming up might be to look in places you might not expect. Look for companies that have a media department or a marketing department that produce their own videos in-house. That could be a good way to start. And I know a lot of really experienced editors, colorists, finishing artists who have actually moved into corporate positions at various companies at various levels and have been, there's always kind of like an attitude I think people have about, oh, you went to work in for a company. That's not real TV. But
Totally.
at the end of the day, a lot of the content, again, I hate that word, but the content production happening is better than some of the TV production happening these
Oh,
days. And
clearly.
that's where a lot of the movement is happening in terms of people's careers. So all I'll say is do not wall yourself off if you're trying to find a position somewhere to only the traditional post-production routes.
I can't agree more. And we discussed this particular thing with a lot of colleagues who are lamenting. Here we are right now. We're recording this in January of 2025. The post production and media entertainment industry has really struggled the past couple years, and it doesn't look like it's getting any better. And I've been talking about that very thing that you mentioned a lot, right? That like there is a lot of work out there. It just might not be in making a narrative feature film or making a doc or making a TV show. It's a lot of this other content. Like, for example, this morning before we started to record, I just happened to click on something. I think it was produced by Red Bull Studios, right? It was like a mountain biking video, and I was like, holy crap, this is high end. It was
Oh,
an
I'd love to work on Red Bull stuff. They do
it,
awesome
it
stuff.
was like an HDR on YouTube. Like it looked, like gyros and helicopters, like the whole 9 yards. I mean, like really high end production. It's never going to see a network per se.
Yep.
It's never going to be on, net, like whatever. It's like this is for the web, and it's really still high end stuff. And I feel that same way about a lot of corporate stuff, that with the advent of social media and creating the C word, as you mentioned, content, right? There is a lot of that effort. The other thing I think about in a lot of times in regards to this part of the conversation is that, and I'm not trying to bloviate and say we're smarter than a lot of other people out there, because that's certainly not true. But I do think of the colorist, the men and women who are colorists, and at that part of the post-production pipeline, I do like to often think about them as like the special forces of post-production, right? The Navy SEALs, the Green Beret type level kind of person, right? Where you get to doing the coloring job mainly because you've come up through the other parts of the ranks, the infantry or whatever, and now you're doing this very specified, highly tuned, highly trained particular part of the post production pyramid. And what I think that ends up meaning is that a lot of people who call themselves colorists actually have a whole plethora of institutional post-production knowledge that other people, in other parts of the pyramid might not necessarily have. And what that can often mean is that you can parlay much easier into other parts of the industry than you could going the other way, right? So like it's not a far stretch by any means to say, "Hey Joey, you know what? You could be a kick-ass post supervisor because guess what? You know visual effects, audio, color, whatever, hardware, workflows, whatever." And same thing goes like with me. Like I wouldn't call myself an audio mixer by any means, but like I know a lot about audio, I know a lot about recording, I know a lot about Foley, I know a lot about like so I there's ways of us, I think, at this tip of the spear, if you will, to parlay ourselves. And I just wish that like, you know, I wish that one of the things I'd been told 25 years ago is that you don't necessarily like you will benefit by being a little bit more wider in your approach than necessarily being totally pinpointed the steer. But the flip side of that too is that like you don't want to be everything. I think
Hmm.
a lot of young folks will be like, well, I'm going to be an editor, a colorist, a DP, a director, a producer. Like, no, at some point in time, focus on the things that you really love and you're really good at. But having that knowledge is definitely helpful.
Yeah, and on that subject of kind of some of the more non-traditional roles that are available today that weren't available kind of when we got started, one thing that I think everybody in the finishing business and the color business needs to really kind of understand, because it can get frustrating and you kind of got to be ready for it, especially if you're going to move into things like corporate or internal advertising agencies or something like that, is that we don't do this for the glory and the accolades and everything else. Oh wow, so and so did the most amazing grade on that show. No, no, no. Our credit is at the very, very bottom, and most of the people in the production process don't admit we exist. And I don't mean that in a bad way,
Yeah.
because it's important in the role of a colorist to kind of check your ego at the door a little bit, in that we're kind of standing on the shoulders of the entire production before us. If we act like we did everything, we're kind of crapping on the DP, the wardrobe people, the production
Totally.
design people, and we shouldn't be, because our work, the quality of our final work, is completely dependent on the quality of the work, all of the work before us, right? So we don't get the glory, and we shouldn't go after the glory and the accolades, because it's not just us.
I
We're doing the
Yeah,
final steps. There's a lot that happens before us. And I think sometimes people
yeah,
forget about that.
yeah. I can't agree more. I mean, I think of this often as like, to use a sports analogy. I often think about this as like the role of the colorist is more like an assistant coach than it is a head coach, right?
Hmm.
And like in our line of work, the DOP, the producer, the director might be more akin to the head coach, and we're kind of playing a supporting role. And if we do our jobs good, that means more glory and honor for the head coach, or those people playing that role. But that's kind of fine. It's just interesting to me that there is actually a lot of ego involved in the world of color, but it's actually kind of like intra world of color, right? It's between other
Yeah, and keep it there.
right between other colors, like I'm hot shit, and you're whatever. You're not going to get that score. I mean, there's been a lot of effort in the past couple years by various bodies and groups and people to kind of put the colorists more on the forefront, with whether that be guilds and unions or getting academy recognition or whatever. And I've always been a little bit of a mixed mind about this because it's true that these days, especially in the mid and lower tier of things, the colorist is responsible often for kind of inventing a little bit of the look and feel, right? But on the high end, that really is not the case, right? The high end colorist is mainly there to support the vision of the director, the DOP, and then kind of to bring it all together to enhance it maybe to a certain degree, but they're not inventing it most of
We're
the time.
realizing it.
Right, they're realizing it. So like it does. I think there is a little bit of a separation there, but I do to your broader point. I think if you're going into this world wanting to be a colorist, you need to do it for the reasons that are more subtle and less seen than this idea of like, oh my God, I'm going to become the guy and everybody's going to know who I am and I'm going to heap awards on and what it just doesn't work like that. And in fact, I would say that the most successful and most highly prized, best booked, highest earning colorists are often the people that are the most unassuming, softest
Mm-hmm.
spoken, kind of relaxed people that kind of know their role and place in the process rather than trying to have to stick out.
Yeah, I would say, and I've been guilty of this many, many times. Uh, your ego can get in the way of doing a good job,
Yeah.
right? If you want to chase the glory, sometimes that glory will take the role of a very big difference when you hit before and after, right? Uh, and that might not always be good, right? We don't want to necessarily make huge sweeping changes and put a huge footprint on a project. It might feel cool as an individual,
Yeah.
but it could happen, and it often happens at the expense of the quality of the grade. So if you can kind of keep that ego in check a little bit, which we've all struggled with in the past, myself included, and kind of keep yourself grounded in the reality of a project, I think you can end up with a much better grade at the end. And then you get happier clients, and then you get better projects, and the whole thing feeds back into better work.
Yeah, and I think it ultimately means, I think it means more success and more consistent work and better work. I think that whether or not clients will say this directly or not, I've never had clients say this to me, either way. But I think that the more dependable and just kind of if people can just your clients can just assume that you're their go-to person, that's the position you want to be into, right? For long-term success, it's all about being the go-to person for as many people as you possibly can versus I'm the guy for one project, look at me, look at me, look at me, and kind of basing like this is not I think about oftentimes about like academics, like you and I are both into space and physics and stuff, right? And like you often see like really, really, really smart, physicists who like when they were 25, they came up with their one idea and then they spend the rest of their life kind of like refining and define. Like that's not the color correction world, right? The thing in color correction you want to be is adaptable, flexible, and always be that go-to person. And if you can do that successfully, you probably never really get all that well known outside of the people that know. You're not going to be a household name. You're not going to be Brad Pitt or whatever, right? Angelina Jolie or whoever.
Speak for yourself.
Oh yeah. But if you are unassuming, you do a good job, you are dependable. Like that's what I wish 25 years ago somebody had told me. Like, be your goal should be to be Mr. Dependable rather than Mr. Flashy. And I could have saved a lot of stress and hassle trying to, be that rather than, early on trying to be like the guy kind of thing,
Yeah, and like I said, it's a learning experience that's continual, but it does show in the quality of your work. Your attitude can show in the quality of your work in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. I think another thing that I think of often is, that nobody really talks about, but um, is true and it has to be managed is that where we find ourselves in the pipeline is often at the bottom of the proverbial S hill. You know what I mean? There's
Yes.
that phrase that, rolls downhill. And I think that's very true about becoming a colorist. I mean, we experience this probably all every day. You're in a session doing work with clients like, well, why is that text graphic off? Or why is that audio sound like that? Or why is that, X pick a thing out of a hat, right? And oftentimes, I think that the role of the modern colorist is a little bit post supervisor for a lot of types of productions, right? It is a little bit of managing expectations, problem solving, trying to put the pieces together to create a cohesive final
You
product.
got to be a little bit of a traffic cop, but you got to do it in a nice way to keep everybody happy.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And I think that, early on in my career, it was very easy to be like, well, I don't do that. That's not what
Not
I
my problem.
do. That's not my problem. And over the years I've learned that like, yeah, sure, there's certain times where like you physically can't do it, right? Like you're not going to be able to like, you know, I'm sorry, the bed for the Atmos mixes is screwed up. Like, sorry, I can't fix that, right? You got to go back to the mixer to do it. But there's a lot of things that we can do, especially now with the tool sets that we have, that win a lot of kudos with clients. And I think I would say it by just like, stretch your boundaries a little bit when you can in a comfortable way, because it can win you a lot of benefits, right? For
Yeah.
example, uh somebody comes in and goes, oh man, we just need to make a little minor edit. A lot of colorists will not touch that. They'll be like, no, you got to send that back to editorial. You got to make like, I'm like, dude, you can make that ripple edit or that roll edit like with 5 frames. You know how to do it. It's easy. Like, don't need a nickel and dime. Like, there's a lot of little things.
And being pedantic about stuff like that just makes it more stressful for you in the end because then oh now I got to reconform, now I got to do
Right,
this, now I got to do that.
right.
You know, like you said, we part of being at the end of that bottom of the hill, as you say, is that we have knowledge of all of the different pieces coming in, and
Yeah.
we can kind of make an informed decision as to where we can help kind of outside of our lane and when we need to bring the other collaborators on the team in.
Yes, and I think that we're in a unique position to do so. And I just wish that 25, 30 years ago, somebody had said to me, you might want to do color correction, but it will behoove you more to in the long run to know a little about a lot, right? And I think that's ultimately kind of where I've gotten. I know a lot about, I know a little about a lot of things. Not that I'm experts in any particular one, but that's a real big benefit of just where we sit in the process, knowing a little bit about a lot of various parts like camera lenses, DIT work, file management, whatever it may be, IT, all those kind of things really can pay dividends of where we are.
And that's one of the kind of cool things about being a career colorist is you touch so many other disciplines
Yeah.
that it's always a little bit of a learning experience. And even if a project comes in and you might not understand one part of the deliverable requirements, guess what? Now you're going to learn something about a technology you didn't know about before, and you're going to leave knowing more than you started with the project. If you go into it with that attitude of, I'm going to use this as a learning experience for stuff that I can kind of expand and grow a little bit. That's the positive to being at the bottom of the hill. The downside is when anybody's deadline shifts before you, it means your deadline gets tighter. But we can also learn a lot from all of these processes.
Yeah, and it's also about modulating what you kind of how much you put that out there, right? So, like, I know a tremendous amount about, I don't know, just pick something out of a hat, DCPs, right? But I don't really market like, our company as like, oh, we're a DCP authoring company, right? Because like to a certain degree, like, yes, I can do it, I know about it, etc. but it's not something I love, not something I'm like, oh my God, this really completes me. So I just kind of like don't really talk about it a lot. But when those things come up and I can see a client that's in need, or I can fill a gap really easily and not have them spend thousands and thousands and deal with difficult workflows, then I'll insert myself in those situations, right? And I think that ends up buying a lot of brownie points in the end, but it also helps you modulate that feeling of doing spreading yourself too thin. Like, yeah, cool, you know about that. You don't have to do it every single time on every single project or offer that service to everybody. You can just kind of, adapt as needed.
Yeah, my example, as you know, as we talked about at length over the past couple months, is that I recently got involved in a extremely deep technical dive into some
All right,
very detailed IMF packaging issues for some various streaming platforms.
right.
And it was a huge learning experience for me because I hadn't done a huge amount of IMF stuff besides very basic, but also all of the other little things I've learned along the way about technology, metadata, Dolby Vision, Dolby Atmos, how these
Absolutely.
technologies work, and what the different pieces are, kind of let me be the hub for the engineers on this side and the edit
Well,
department on this side, and how all of this has to come together. And when we had problems, it kind of let me troubleshoot and, like I said, kind of be the traffic cop to figure out, okay, you need to do this, I need to do this. We can put it all together this way. And it was so deeply technical. I found that really rewarding because I love that stuff. Not everybody will, but those are the kind of, to put a positive spin on this whole thing with the
yeah.
changing industry and kind of the state of being a colorist and what nobody tells you is that there are opportunities for really rewarding challenges that you wouldn't associate with just doing a color grade.
100% agree, and it brings up a broader point of like tangential career paths and career spinoff, right? And like I've over the years, for those who know me, know that I've spent a lot of time in education. I've spent a lot of time in speaking, and whatever. And like, part of I think what I hear you saying is that like, hey, you gather this knowledge, you learn about more. It might not be your core service or something you offer to everybody, but you know about it, and so that leads to opportunities like, oh, hey, I can go to a conference and I can talk about XYZ intelligently. I can be on a panel and talk about this. I could write a blog for somebody about this or like whatever. And
You
so,
could
like,
make a
you
podcast.
can make a podcast about it, right? Like, there's a whole bunch of ways that, that knowledge that you're accruing can be used in other ways, whether there are ways to monetize that knowledge or ways just to have a creative outlet like this show is for us. That kind of thing can be super helpful. The last thing I want to talk about is that I have a lot of friends and family that when they talk about their careers, they talk about it as like a series of milestones and advancements, right? Like, oh, I was the junior partner, now I'm the senior partner, or like I was the associate director, and now I'm the director of it, right? And I think that one thing to understand about our industry is that the advancement and growth and moving up means something very different in our industry than it does in a lot of under industries, right? Like, becoming, titles are rather superfluous in our industry, right? Like you can have like, oh, I am the chief senior head honcho, supervising lead colorist. Like, okay, cool. Who cares? It's just a title, right? For us, it doesn't necessarily mean moving up the food chain per se. Like I think where a colorist is really going to top out doing color is okay. They're full. Their workload is 100%. So now the next logical step is they're managing colorists below them, right? Assistants or junior colorists and kind of supervising that work. From there, it's kind of iffy what the next step is, right? Because a lot of that next step, whether you become a post supervisor, you are an internal producer, you're an EP, whatever, often means getting out of the color suite and not doing the technical work, right? So I think that, one of the things I wish I had known is that like growth is a very subjective thing within our industry. And what it
Yeah.
really often means is working on bigger, more visible type projects than it is, the crappy, invisible type work. It doesn't necessarily mean bigger pay rate, bigger pay, better benefits, more glory, and all that kind of stuff. It can often just mean actually the opposite. It can mean more headaches, more technical challenges, more, problems to deal with.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you, as the individual artist, kind of need to decide what type of growth and career path fits you best, because it's not going to be, you know, colorist level 1, colorist level 2, 3, 4 in
Well,
advancement. Like,
dude, it's even like like more based than that. Like, so, a couple years ago, I decided to do an MBA, right? And like most people in the world be like, well, I'm gonna do an MBA because if I have an advanced degree, it means that I can get paid more for my job, get a better title, move up in the world. Like my boss, Robbie Carmen, is not paying me more because I got an advanced degree. You know what I'm saying? So like, there are certain things that we have to do. You have to do in the color world that may be betterment and improvement and enrichment, but they don't necessarily correlate to more money, higher visibility, etc. So kind of like modulating those expectations of what career advancement means as a colorist is something I wish I understood a little bit better, because I thought by the time I'm, almost 50, it would mean Ferraris, mansions, private planes. It hasn't quite panned out to that quite yet.
I
But
sold my Ferrari. It was
I
too much
know
work.
it always those oil changes cost an arm and a leg for those things. It's crazy. So I just wish I had known that in mind, because what I have found myself doing over my career is enriching myself in ways that are important to me personally, but don't necessarily benefit me in my work like it might be for other types of careers. So that's important to know for sure.
Yeah. So I mean, I think we got a good balance here
Yeah.
of the doom and gloom and
Yep.
some actual actionable solutions and perspective, right? At the end of the day, like you said, I wouldn't trade it for the world. I love this job. I love what we're doing. Yeah, I like sitting down and going through 1,000 shots and making them all better, and then watching the show and seeing it come together at the very end and being I like being the end of the process and the last set of critical eyes on it, because it just makes me feel good about it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love this job. So it might not be for everyone, and there's different approaches to it, but I wanna end on a positive note. Uh, it's still a great thing to do.
I'll do the same thing. I think that I'm more prone to doom and gloom than you are sometimes. I also think that, like any job, there are peaks and valleys in this kind of thing. Where sometimes you're feeling on top of the world, and sometimes you're feeling like the most untalented, worst colors in the world. I can't tell you how many times in a week that I'm like having a conversation with my wife or my family and be like, "I'm the worst colorist ever," and she's like, "No, you're not." I'm like, "Yes, I am." "No, you're not." "Yes, I am." And then you're like, oh, well, client just wrote me a nice note saying how much they love the project. So I guess I'm not the worst colorist today. So, I mean, there is that ebb and flow that you kind of have to ride to. And I also just think that, if you're getting into the game now, it's really challenging just because we are at the boat is rocking so much.
Yeah.
AI, company consolidation, industry change. Like, it's a really, really wacky time. And I think if you go into it with open eyes about the broader picture, a broader set of skills, and do what you love, like nobody ever didn't, if you do what you love, no day feels like work, right? And I think that that's true today as it was 10 or 20, 25 years ago. So I agree that there's nothing I'd rather be doing maybe than, being a rock star and touring, in front of arenas every night. But that ship has also sailed, so I guess I'll take being a colorist. All right, so for the Offset Podcast, I'm Robbie Carmen.
And I'm Joey Deanna. Thanks for listening.